dangerous object that could fall onto you. Protect and cover your head while holding onto your covering until the shaking stops. Fire equipment is located next to wedding preparation room, corridor, foyer, ballroom 3, and next to the staircase D and E. We remind you that this is a non-smoking area. Smoking, including the charging and use of e-cigarettes, is prohibited throughout the hotel area. When you hear the first alarm, please remain alert and prepare yourself for any possible evacuation. And when you hear the second continuous alarm followed by announcement on the public address system, please leave the floor immediately by using the exit doors nearest to you and proceed to the nearest emergency exit. Our fire wardens will direct you to the assembly area. Please do not use the elevators. Try to re-enter the building or go down to the car park until instructed it is safe to do so. On behalf of the management and my fellow associates, we hope you will have an enjoyable experience at Yogyakarta Marriott Hotel. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, dan selamat sejahtera bagi kita semua. Selamat pagi Bapak dan
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome at side event seminar, Disaster Risk Financing and Insurance and Adaptive Social Protection Implementation in Indonesia. My name is Fadila Arsi. I'm a research officer at RDI, and I will assist you in today's seminar. As before we start the discussion, please allow me to greet the speakers and also participants of today's discussion. The Honorable Mr. Wio Santoso, a representative of the Governor of Yogyakarta Special Region, Dr. Pargiono, the expert staff of Minister of Finance, Dr. Maliki, a Director of Poverty Reduction of Ministry of National Development Planning. Thank you very much for coming. And also representative of AAMS and the honorable speakers, panelists, and also moderator who will share their expertise in our topic. And also I would like to greet representatives of ministries, government agencies, educational agencies, and also other representatives joining in Kraton Ballroom 3 in Marriott Hotel Yogyakarta, or also audiences joining online. And before we proceed, Our discussion will be mainly in Bahasa Indonesia. Therefore, if you need any assistance in translation, we have provided translation devices at the back of this room. There will be two strategic themes for this discussion. As we saw in the video, it is related on the RFI. In Indonesia, it's called Pembiayaan Asuransi Risiko Bencana. And in addition to DRFI, we will also discuss another strategy developed by government of Indonesia, which is adaptive social protection. Both major strategies are Indonesians' commitments in accelerating disaster management, and we hope that they can increase this resilience of community in facing disasters, as we know that Indonesia is facing various hazards. Therefore, during this seminar, we will obtain knowledge, information from the experts, practitioners, and also government agencies who are very experienced in these topics. And this discussion will give you a comprehensive understanding on how to build this strategy. And we will also discuss about the DFRI and the ASP in more details later. Therefore, without further ado, to start today's program, please allow me to invite Mr. Vio Santoso, the head of Finance Development Agency of Yogyakarta Province. Please allow me to read the welcoming speech of the Governor of Yogyakarta Special Region for the seminar on disaster risk financing. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon us all. The Honorable, the head of Fiscal Policy Agency, and also staff, the resource persons, the seminar participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let's praise our gratitude to God for His blessing. So that we can all gather here to attend this seminar on disaster risk financing and insurance and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia. On behalf of Yogyakarta Special Region Government, we would like to welcome you to Yogyakarta. It's been an honor for us to be selected as a host of this international seminar, ladies and gentlemen. Within the global context, which is in constant change, it is important for us to understand and appreciate the important role of the disaster insurance and social security to assist the community. In natural disasters are real hazards in our life, family, and community. And in this situation, disaster insurance becomes the main pillar in minimizing the financial impact faced by individual and also community. The insurance provide the necessary financial security to recover after disaster event, to rebuild the constructions and also their businesses. Moreover, it is also important to discuss the social security. It is a system designed to provide to protection for the community in difficult situations. Social security involves programs such as health insurance, work accidents insurance, and also pension programs. These programs aim to help a community in addressing social challenges and in securing their welfareness. And through this seminar, we hope that we can discuss various aspects related to disaster insurance and social security, and also challenges faced in the implementations, as well as future steps that can be taken to increase community awareness and participations in utilizing this system. And we hope that this meeting become a precious platform to share knowledge, experiences, and also thoughts. And in these discussions, we can learn each other, we can exploit new ideas, and also build a stronger network to increase understanding on disaster insurance. And I would like to wish you a fruitful discussion, and I hope that these discussions can provide us real steps for future improvements and implementations. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yogyakarta, July 10, 2023, the Governor of Yogyakarta Special Region, Hamengkubuwono X. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Please give a round of applause for the opening remark. And to open our main discussions and seminar, I would like to invite Dr. Parjono, the expert of microfinance, to deliver an opening remark. Dr. Parjono, the floor is yours. The Honorable Mr. Vyos Santoso, the Head of Financial Management, the Honorable Mr. Dr. Maliki, the Director of Poverty Reduction, Ministry of National Development Planning, the Honorable Mr. Agung Wirianto, and also the honorable colleagues of ministries and regional government, panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon us all. Shalom. Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan. First of all, let's praise our gratitude to the God for his blessing and also his health that are given to us, so that we can be gathered here. And I can also see a virtual channel here, so I would like to also greet the audiences joining by online on behalf of Ministry of Finance and also the organizing committee. And I can also see representatives of UNICEF and RDI. I welcome all of you to the seminar of disaster, it is financing and insurance and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia. And please apologize, the title is written in English, but interpretation assistance is available for this program. So back to the previous 10 days ago, we had an earthquake, 6.4 Richter scale, centered in Bantul area at the south part of Yogyakarta province. It resulted the damages to 137 houses and 35 public facilities. Even though the damage was quite light compared to the other earthquakes in Yogyakarta, but this event reminded us for a massive earthquake in Yogyakarta around 2006. Yogyakarta was stricken by a massive earthquake which resulted in massive loss. Unfortunately, during that time, Indonesia didn't have a financial strategy for disaster insurance. The loss transferred to insurance was only 300 billion Indonesians worth, only 1% of the total of loss and damages. So almost all rehabilitation and reconstruction costs had to be funded by the national and regional budgets. And in the next 12 years after that event, series of disasters still followed in Indonesia, such as tsunami in Sunda Strait, earthquake in Sulawesi and in Lombok. So those disasters provided a tagline for Indonesia as a disaster supermarket, and at the same time the National Development Agency recorded that there have been more than 3,500 disasters occurred, causing casualties for more than 13,000 people, and economic loss was estimated around 100 trillion rupiah. And these various disasters, along with the massive loss in economic sector, encouraged Indonesia to launch the insurance financing for disaster that we called as DRFI, or disaster risk financing insurance. This strategy aims to increase the ability for financing or capacity for financing and to build the economic resiliency in the midst of disaster events in Indonesia. Through this strategy, the disaster management capacity can be strategized by seeking other economic or financing alternatives, and some of the risk can be transferred through insurance mechanism. Ladies and gentlemen, this disaster management strategy has been acknowledged by various international organizations as a significant achievement in strengthening the financing of disaster risk. Moreover, because Indonesia is among very few countries which implements the DRFI as a crucial part of the strategy, the government has established a disaster pooling fund. This instrument is a fund pool, the first one in this world in collecting fund for disaster management. This one is also flexible and responsive in nature, as well as sustainable and as a complement to a national and regional budget that can be reliable in the long term. And we will discuss the benefits and the details of this mechanism in a specific session in today's seminar. And ladies and gentlemen, other interesting details is that our government is developing a social adaptive social protection. It is a follow-up for the president's direction, who mandated the social reformation system. The high risk of a disaster and saw us that we cannot separate disaster and climate change. We see that there is the rise in the sea level, which caused impacts to the productivity of community without proper intervention. Such situation can threaten Indonesian's community. Therefore, through the national development planning, the government has planned the implementation of adaptive social protection into the middle and long-term national development planning. Several international organizations also provided assistance as part of Indonesia's serious commitment in implementing this ASP. These two systems, which are still in the developing process, has made Indonesia a country that is asked to share their experiences and challenges in implementing this system. Therefore, together with the Asian collaboration system and also as Indonesia's presidency, we are proud to conduct this seminar to mainstream the implementation of this DRFINS ASP implementation in the Asia regional. We hope that this seminar can increase the understanding of the various stakeholders, either at national or Asia level. We invite experts and also local stakeholders from various levels to gain aspirations, inputs, or other considerations in the implementations of DRFIN adaptive social protection. We also encourage the participants to actively engage in this discussion to share the best lesson learned, since Southeast Asia possess the highest risk in terms of disaster events in this world. And we would like to thank you for joining us and also for actively collaborating here in this activity. And I also see the alumni of World Bank here, so we would like to welcome your inputs in our today's seminar, and we would like to thank you to the organizing committee, Mrs. Yoki and team, UNICEF and RDI, and all the parties who help in organizing this discussion. Have a fruitful discussion, ladies and gentlemen. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Parjono. And it's for the next session. Before we go to the discussion session, we will go to the photo session. So, ladies and gentlemen, the participants, speakers, moderators, and panelists, And we would like to invite you to come forward onto the stage to start the photo session. So for documentation session, I would like to request your assistance to direct the participants. Dr. Parjono, Mr. Ivio Santoso, Dr. Maliki, and also other participants, please come forward onto the stage to start the photo session. For a documentation team, please provide direction. So let's count on my count. Are you ready? Please move closer. So 1, 2, 3. Give your best smile. 1 and 2 and 3. Let's one more. Another style. 1, 2, 3. Do we still have any opportunity? Yes. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to go to our main agenda, the discussion session. And the discussion session will be divided into 3 parts. The first one is a presentation session. There will be 5 main topics presented by experts from the government agencies and stakeholders working in this topic. The session 1 topic is advancing disaster risk financing and insurance strategy, a look at Indonesia's current progress, by Dr. Rocky as the from Fiscal Policy Agency, Ministry of Finance. And session number 2 is about reforming Indonesian social protection through adaptive social protection by Dinar Dana Karisma, Directorate of Poverty Reduction and Community Empowerment, Ministry of National Development Planning. And the third session will be about considerations and recommendations for operationalizing Indonesia's adaptive social protection. And it will be presented by Mrs. Diah Lestari as a social protection expert. And session 4 will be about emergency social protection financing towards child-sensitive, gender-responsive, and adaptive social protections, which will be presented by Mr. Ruben Villanueva as a social policy specialist, UNICEF Regional Office for East Asia and Pacific. While session 5 is about integrating ASP and DRFI key considerations, which will be presented by Mr. Saud Sagala as the Senior Research Fellow of Resilient Development Initiative. And after that, there will be a second session, which is panel discussion, which will be assisted by a moderator. And we already have we will invite the panelists to explore more on our topics. And we have invited 2 panelists. Number 1 is Dr. Engineer Udre as the Director of Disaster Risk Mapping and Evaluation, National Agency for Disaster Management. And the second panelist is Mr. Safikul Islam as a Social Policy Specialist, UNICEF Indonesia. And then it will be followed up by a question and answer session. And in this session, you can deliver your questions. And As for the participants in this room and also in the YouTube channel, please keep your questions. And for those joining online, also provide can also provide their question through by accessing or scanning this barcode. And those are our session during this seminar until around 12 p.m. and have a fruitful discussions so that we can implement these two major strategies in an effective manner as mentioned by our previous speech deliverer. And therefore, allow me to invite our moderator for today's discussion. I would like to invite Dr. Ramanditya Wimbardanya Wimbadi as a fellow researcher at Resilience Development Initiative. Dr. Ramanditya, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ramanditya. I'm a research fellow from the Research Development Initiative. Allow me to greet the representative of the Governor, Bapak Pardiono, Bapak Maliki, Director of Poverty Reduction and Community Empowerment, Bapak Utrecht, Mapping, Director of Mapping of National Board of Disaster Management, and representative of Asian member countries +3, and ladies and gentlemen from various agencies and invitees. It is an honor for me personally for becoming the moderator in relation to TRFI and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia. Maybe some of us only heard what is TRFI and ASP. Disaster risk financing and insurance is actually mix between instrument financing that enables government to minimize the risk, such as to manage the strategy of funding either from the national budget or non-national budget, such as transferring the risk to third party through insurance. And the second topic is also an emerging topic in the social protection that we focus will be on adaptive social protection. What is adaptive social protection? It is a system to use the social protection that can be utilized to community resilience in facing disaster and climate change. As we know that social protection, social support is used for healthcare, for disaster victims, for example, to so that the community will be able to heal and to recover their economy in short term. However, it is not enough to restore the condition. That's why the ASP is aimed to develop the resilience before the disaster takes place. ASP and TRFI have been conducted by other organizations abroad, such as in the Philippines, in Africa, and also in Caribbean countries. And we are very fortunate today, for we will have a very good experience and practical knowledge on the implementation of TRFI and ASP. We will divide into three. We will divide the session into three parts. We will have a discussion, presentation, and then after we completed the presentation, we will move to the panelist session, where the two panelists will give respond to the topic that have been presented by the presenters. And lastly, we will open a discussion session for participants who are within this hotel or those who attending online. Without further ado, I would like to invite the first presenter to come to the stage, Ms. Yuki Rahmayanti, the fiscal policy board that will deliver her first presentation, advancing disaster risk financing and insurance strategy lookout at Indonesia's current progress. The floor is yours. For the second session, I would like to invite Mr. Dinar Dana Karisma, Directorate of Poverty Reduction and Community Empowerment, Ministry of National Development Planning, or Bappenas, that will present about reforming Indonesia's national protection through adaptive social protection. We kindly invite Mr. Dinar to come to the stage. For the third presenter, we have Dia Larasati, a social protection expert, that will deliver a topic in relation to considering an accommodation for operationalizing Indonesia's active social protection. Ms. Dia Larasati, the floor is yours. Please come forward to the stage. For the fourth presenter will be delivered online. That will delivered by Mr. Ruben Villanova. That is a social policy specialist from UNICEF Regional Office for East Asia and Pacific. That will deliver emergency social protection financing toward child-sensitive, gender-responsive, and adaptive social protection.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Ruben. And next, for the last speaker, we have sebagai fellow researcher dari Resilient Development Initiative,
Senior Research Fellow from Resilient Development Initiative, that will deliver about integrating ASP and TRFI key considerations. We can ask you to join us on the stage. Because now the presenters are all sitting on the stage, we will start our first session that will be presented by Ms. Yuki Rahmayanti, that will discuss about advancing disaster risk financing and insurance strategy, look at Indonesia's current progress. To Ms. Yuki, the floor is yours. Please start. Thank you very much. Good morning and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us. I'm very happy to meet all of you in this very fine morning. From the ministry, I'm from the Ministry of Finance at the Fiscal Policy Board for Bilateral Policy. I am mandated to deal with disaster risk financing and insurance in this morning. Allow me to present about the progress that we have been handling so far at the BKL and the Ministry of Finance. A short or a brief presentation that I will deliver because I only have 12 minutes in time to give impact or how serious a disaster in Indonesia. We can see the risk of disaster in Indonesia. It's quite large, from 514 regency and city. There are 192 regency or city with a high risk index. We are on the top 3 with high risk, prone to high risk of disaster. We also have Philippines, also in Asia, India for the first and the second position. And the effect of the fiscal, social is very great, and it seems that it's going to be a trend that going to increase, which is quite worrying for all of us, especially if we connect it to the climate change phenomenon that we can feel even today. From the social aspect, also loss of life also increase for the past 3 years. So our last data is up to 2021, and then in relation to fiscal impact, it's quite large. Next. From the historical data, we can take average. It's around 22 trillion per year. It's quite large, and it will become burden to our national budget. And at the bottom you can see that we allocate emergency funding every year, mostly used. Some year we only left a little bit. In 2018, 2019, the budget is even over what we expected, and there are many hazards that we have. We have 9 hazards, not only earthquake. Earthquake is the largest damages. And then on the bottom right, we can see that from so many risks, we can only cover a little bit from the especially from the national budget and regional budget from the regional government. Every year they allocate and distribute the funding for disaster management, and there are still a lot of residual risk that have not yet been covered by the funding. That's why we initiate this adapted disaster risk financing and insurance. We can see from this scheme from the left, this is the strategy before PARP, or disaster risk financing and insurance. We still have residual risk. The most budget comes from the national budget and regional budget. and we already have micro insurance such as farming insurance that allocated by the Ministry of Agriculture. From the data, it is not quite popular yet, and what is provided by the government usually become the burden from the farmers, and it costs farmers not interested in utilizing the insurance. We also have donor and before the TRFI strategy. After the TRFI, we hope that the residual risk will become smaller, and it will become smaller and smaller in time, and we will increase our pooling fund, disaster pooling fund. We will explore further about this, and in the long term we will also develop about risk transfer strategy through insurance, either through insurance that covers public assets, PMN, national assets and regional assets. Both of them are public assets. And we also have a micro insurance that I already mentioned earlier. We hope that the micro insurance can be more dominant in the long term. The characteristics that we would like to implement in terms of TRFI is that there will be some policy mix. That previously we only focus more on spending. Maybe in the future we can use spending and insurance premium, and in a very long term, until 2050, we will rely less and less to the national budget. And this funding is proactive, not reactive, after the disaster take place. But in the beginning we can calculate the risk that may happen, so it's more on proactive side. We hope that with their FI strategy, we hope that we can improve the timeliness and also the amount of the funding. For the timeliness, because we already have a backup funding for emergency response, it can be distributed quite quickly. But pre-disaster or post-disaster, we still follow the common fund national budget mechanism. We hope that it can be accelerated and more flexible, and to use a policy mix by taking into consideration various risk, and each instrument will tackle various risk and on target in distributing the funding. We hope that there's an improvement of the target also. It will be harmonized or synergized with the ASP that will be discussed by the next presenters. And lastly, we will utilize data and information, so to make sure that we can become more proactive and more accurate in calculating the losses that may take place from disaster, so that we can allocate the proper amount. And next, in relation to the establishment and management of PFP, we have issued the government regulation, enacted the government presidential decree. Currently we have a Ministry of Finance regulation, so that we can be more proactive, and there is a mandate based on the decree from the Ministry of Finance to assign a public service body to provide service in relation to managing the fund, rather than using the ministry, which is more strict and more rigid. We hope that they're using the we hope that we can also manage sources from not only from the government source but also from private sources. The roadmap of pooling fund, disaster pooling fund, we look at a very long horizon. We are now in the 2023 as a last mile to complete the Ministry of Finance decree. In 2024, we will start to implement. We will use the funding that for payment of insurance premium for the national and regional assets. And in the next future, we hope that in 2040 to 2050, the funding from the state budget will become reduced. The next slide is quite complicated, but we will read it from the right side to the left side. So funding from various sources, from the national budget, regional budget, and from outside such as grant, will be received by the management board, that will be accumulated and developed, and the result will be then used. The strategy will be short-term investment and long-term investment. Short-term investment, the expected return is still low for now, around 3 to 4%. Maybe in the future it can be 7 to 8% and even much more. And then we will have a proposal of funding from the ministries and agency that will be reviewed, especially by PNPB, National Board of Disaster Management, and other ministries. From those two streams will join in, and we will be able to distribute the fund. That short explanation about the DRFI management. And next, when we distribute the fund, we will harmonize with adaptive social protection, and we will have policy mix through insurance. I don't think I don't need to elaborate this in detail. We can explore that during the Q&A. The trajectory is quite positive. The insurance for the state and regional assets covers many agency and ministries, and we hope and then on the next slide, the development of PMN state asset in Indonesia. We are very active for disaster risk financing strategy for regional level, and there is also side event in ASEAN, and we also with ASEAN plus 3 with APEC also, because we try to find the position in Indonesia, not to avoid not to become market only, but also player at the regional level. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and may peace be upon us. Round of applause to Ibu Yogi. As presented by Miss Yogi, actually Indonesia is developing various options for DRFI strategy, not only depend on state budget or regional budget, but also pooling fund, and to support the insurance to manage disasters. The key is that to remove the dependency and to be more flexible. It's also still connected with the main principle of DRFI, it's related to the social protection. Adaptive social protection. It also covers. Next, I would like to invite Bapak Dinar to present reforming Indonesia social protection through adaptive social protection. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you very much for the opportunity. This has been an ongoing process, and it's been quite a while, starting in 2018, to transform our social security protection into more adaptive one. And there have been various efforts, and it has been our main agenda in the national and regional plannings. So indeed, this is a very significant issue, even up to the international level, and we are glad that attention toward this issue is getting stronger and wider collaboratively with relevant stakeholders. Please give me a reminder in terms of time. So this is just an illustration to tell you why this is a significant issue. As mentioned before, that poverty is not separated from emergency and disaster events, and as we see after COVID-19, the poverty index has increased, and the peak is almost similar to 2019 poverty index. So COVID-19 is like undoing our efforts in poverty management and moved our work backwards 3 years. Therefore, if we don't have appropriate efforts to overcome this, then we will be moving forward and backwards all the time. That's why we need to think a bit out of the box. And we see that the ASP has become a good strategy to address this. And we have conducted many quote unquote through expansion of social assistance during COVID-19, but it's not always, only some which are big in natures. For example, COVID-19, we expanded the PKH, and then the food assistance up from 15 million. And this expansion usually is conducted in two dimensions. One in terms of coverage, and the second is in terms of benefit level, or the amount of the subsidy given. However, our options are still limited. These programs cannot yet provide strong security, and they have to be assisted by other programs. So as you know, that there were many new developed programs during the COVID-19. Actually, there are many challenges in the implementation of social protection programs. From the social protection implementation itself, and also expansion in the disaster protection, and it's still dominated by central government. Therefore, there is space for regional government to take part. The challenge of central government is a generalization. We have similar programs from Aceh to Merauke, while in fact we have specific situations for each area. Therefore, we need the role of a regional government as a top-up to complete the implementation of a central government program. Our challenge in the expansion is that the social protection is very rigid, only for those who are poor and vulnerable. And there is a gap because during disaster, those who are not in the poverty group are also impacted. Therefore, we need flexibility in our programs to be more adaptive in nature. So this is the concept. Number 3 is our goal. Number 1, we have a regular social protection implemented in our daily activities from year to year. What we need is to strengthen, to make this regular become adaptive. So regular functions during normal situation. When we strengthen it to make it functional during the disaster events. When we talk about adaptive, it covers all social protection, but it is more adaptive. So it can perform optimally both in a regular and also disaster events. So what are the visions? So this is our social protection. Number 1 is a fast identification of the impacted population. Quick, accurate, to see the impact. So when we provide benefit, we know exactly the need. We are strong in mobilizing community in building their capacity, and also on-time delivery. And another point is that we know the source, and it is our main question in today's discussion. So if we want to change quickly and adaptively, we have to know the source. So Bapanas brought this concept during the early COVID-19 management. There is a social protection reform, and there are major elements here. 1, data transformation. 2, development of adaptive social protection. And number 3 is better digitalization of social assistance payment, and then innovation of social protection financing, more sustainable social protection financing, and 5 programs integration. These are our keys for adaptive social protection. Specifically, this is the more specific strategy. Number 1 is strengthening of partnership in institution. This is not a one-party job. Instead, this is a collaboration that should be built. And number 2, availability and utilization of data and information on disaster and climate change. And the adaptive social protection must be integrated and also supported by a strong financing. So we conducted this last year. Probably you are very familiar with this too. We also conducted a social economic registry. So we collected data of all Indonesian population, and the rationale behind this is on a disaster data. So when we talk about disaster, we cannot only focus on poor and vulnerable groups. We have to identify all population who are vulnerable or living in disaster prone areas. We have to identify their need. We have to also identify how to deliver the assistance during disaster events. So this is our map of social protection. Some focus on family, elderly, persons with disabilities, and children. We have a cash transfer mechanism, food, insurance, rehabilitation, empowerment, and the below arrow, the triangle pyramid, is the adaptive approach. So how to build an adaptive capacity for the existing assistance program, and to make them perform more optimally, especially in reaching out the other groups who are not yet affected by the social security. And ladies and gentlemen, this is our future homeworks. Number 1 is the data transformation. So this is our homework, particularly from the Bappenas and also Ministry of Finance. We have to map this data together to become our foundation to plan, to budget, and to implement activities based on data, so that we are stronger in providing adaptive programs. And number 2 is capacity building for all government agencies and relevant stakeholders, and then collaboration. And the last one is monitoring and evaluation, how to see whether our programs are effective and achieve its goal. I think that's all from me, and thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to have discussions with all of you. Give a round of applause for Mr. Dinar. Thank you, Mr. Dinar. From the presentation, I can summarize that the formulation of ESP is strengthening the existing social protection to be more adaptive to the needs of disaster management, and the most important is to overcome the risk. Therefore, we need a social protection transformation. Continuing from that point, we have Mrs. Dia who will present her topic on consideration and recommendations for seeing Indonesians' adaptive social protection.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum. May peace be upon us. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share my idea for the discourse of DRFI and adaptive social protection. I'm representing the social protection. We are still learning about the DRFI and how to make our social protection is more effective in the recurring disaster for the past 3 years. In our agency, we also work together with the Ministry of National Development Planning on how to reform, to improve, and strengthen our social system. Because I have a very short time in my presentation, usually one slide, 1 minute, so 37 slide now. So I need to deliver it quickly, because some already delivered by my other colleagues, And we I would like to echo what Pak Dinar mentioned, that taking into consideration the total population of Indonesia, their contribution on how to improve, and we can see from the data ILF 2000 and the past 7 years, we can see that the group of people, there are many significant factors to reduce the prosperity of the community. Is the death of primary breadwinner, reaching the pension age, and disaster. And it was also mentioned about the reform, but I would like to step back that in the age group, each age group have their own risks and vulnerability. So at the back of our mind, there is always risk and vulnerabilities for children, workers, and elders. Each group have their risks, but there is a cross-cutting risk, and one of which is health, and then disability condition, and also the happening of disaster and slow onset due to climate change. It was mentioned by Mr. Dinar that the poverty rate continue to decrease year by year, but the disaster and the effect of climate change also contribute or add risks and vulnerability to our community groups. We can see that in each area, such as in Bengkulu, they have less and less fish that they can catch due to erosion. And also in Bali, when they plant rice, there is a decline in the rice production and other area in Indonesia. And for your information, that for poor households, they relatively live in area prone to disaster, so it adds to the risks for their preparedness and adaptation to face the disaster. Therefore, I can also mention about the social protection in Indonesia. For the past 12 years, together with Pak Maliki and Dinar, we continue to improve the social protection program. Indonesian government is relatively aware how important social protection as an instrument, not only to reduce poverty, but also to improve the resilience. So the point here is to build resilience. We have various programs, as mentioned by Mr. Dinar, such as social assistance from the state budget for children, for food resilience, for health, and there are small programs for elders, disabled people with disability, and we also have a social security and social insurance that fully funded. If we look at comprehensively, the social protection in Indonesia is quite comprehensive. We have various ingredients. However, because I was asked to identify gap, the gap that we can identify is that how the social protection system will be able to reach those who are hard to reach, such as people with disability, elders, and also in terms of health, usually children under 5 years of age, difficult to access health facility, and those who are prone to risk, such as informal sectors. So usually those with productive age, working at the informal field, they have higher risk compared to those with people who are working in the formal field. in terms of the budget, the government have a very strong commitment to regularly allocate budget for social protection. So from the Ministry of Finance, every year around 400 trillion, including subsidy, when it targets individual around 1.5% of our GDP, which is comparable to other social welfare in other countries. In relation to adaptive social protection, the building block is already available. We already have a social protection, we have the data, and there are efforts to strengthen the financing of the social protection, including in terms of disaster, and also the management, the institutional arrangement. That's another thing that is important. How's the institution in the social protection? We created a map here based on my understanding for disaster risk management and climate change adaptation, which program that actually have objective to prepare, to build resilience of the community, to prepare them when they are faced with disaster, which one to respond and which to adapt. It will give context. If we see the elements is already available since COVID. COVID becomes our learning point because it's a spillover effect. So probably the government only allocate to those who are poor and vulnerable, but those above that group, the government realized that they need to reach even broader. For social assistance from the Ministry of Social, we have already have budget and programs for social assistance. But because social protection is based on a social funding and social security that is more fully funded, or social insurance, there are a lot of innovation that is done by the Indonesian government, especially during COVID. We give which subsidy, but it's not entirely which subsidy like in other countries. Why we have that program? Because we still do not have unemployment benefit yet at that time, but when it was not available and the productive age are impacted, the government then issue that program, and there are some program modifications in the labor social benefit, and also we provide training not for specifically for disaster, but we can utilize the pre-work program as one of the to mitigate one of the risk in for COVID. Until now, we still provide subsidy for labor social benefit. It's already available now. We can identify and categorize which for preparation age during the so it demonstrates that social protection Indonesia have the capacity to adapt, but as mentioned by Dinar, there are many homework. We need to improve our capacity, our awareness about disaster, and local government needs to be more responsive, so they know what they need to do during disaster. They can do it quickly, and how we can expedite some responses during disaster. And in terms of data, it was mentioned by Dinar. We hope that in the future we will be, all of us as a government, we have and to ensure social inclusion to those who are not yet covered in Muslim. In during war, elders are the disabled and also women should be first saved. So we need to use that context when there is a disaster taking place. COVID, the first prioritize our elders. So we already model the steps, but there should be some improvement because the fact of the matter is that the social assistance for elders and disabled are still very limited. So in the future we hope that we can improve the programs for those groups. And next, in relation about institutional arrangement for adaptive social protection, we already have some example from the National Board of Disaster Management. When there's a disaster, and it involve a cross minister, but it require the involvement from the president. Now the question is it possible for the regional government to be able to implement that? We want to learn about that further in relation to the institutional for adaptive social protection. There is still homework for collaboration and coordination. And finally, as my slide, ideally our social protection will be able to give protection to all life cycle of our citizen that cover various incidents, and also to improve the resilience. So the keyword is building resilience. So with this discussion, I hope that we can make improvement. The existing program can be much better, and we are more ready in terms of finance and programs. I look forward for further discussion. Thank you. Round of applause to Ibu Dia. So we have heard the presentation from Ibu Dia. Actually, we have a various potential to utilize social protection programs prior to the disaster, during disaster, and post disaster. However, there are many challenges that we need to address, and we need to some kind of a role to be able to sew together the to be able to implement the TRFI. We will move to the
social protection, financing towards child sensitive, gender responsive, and adaptive social protection. So in different part of the world. So Mr. Ruben, can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I give the stage to you
Hear me?
from now. Yeah, you have 12 minutes.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with you. Pacific, but also globally, are forging innovative approaches in bridging this financing gap between disaster risk and social protection. So, next slide, please. I cannot see the screen, so just let me know if you are the right slide. So just capitulate, summarize very quickly. Let me focus on the early childhood on children, of course, as Ms. Deya was mentioning, productive age population and others. But I'm focusing today the need for financing social protection, focus on child, right, on children. As you can see there, basically, East Asian Pacific, still our region, has the highest overrepresentation of children living in poverty globally. And this is quite an issue here, given our level of development. And only 1/4 of children, or 26% of children worldwide, this is globally, are covered by one social protection benefit, right? So still 3/4 of children are less than protected in these days. So that's our starting point of why child-centered social protection should be stepped up. Next slide, please. More than any other region in the world, in East Asian Pacific, we are having children are having to survive multiple and often overlapping climate and environmental shocks and hazards. You can see there, as compared to their parents, there has been an increased six-fold increase in the number of shocks that children are facing. As you can see in Indonesia, there more than 50% of children are having to face 3 or more shocks. And can you imagine the impact of one particular shock in those early years? How are the impacts in terms of developmental gains and outcomes, right? So all these issues erodes the capacity of people and children, of course, to respond to the combinations of different shocks, also in Indonesia, of course. And this multiplication of risks exacerbates inequality. And of course, poorer children have fewer resources to respond to those increasing frequency of crises, shocks, and hazards. And this has a long-term impact. So from that starting point, making a case for a better financing for adaptive social protection with a problem of children, it's a must in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, right? Next slide, please. So you have already touched upon, Mrs. Dia, Mr. Dinar, how it's being done in Indonesia. Let me bring you a bit of the global and theoretical framework of why you need to do in terms of financing better and stronger social protection for shock response, right? Of course, the climate breakdown, as I was saying, is changing the world. And the poorer households have less resources and capacity to cope with those shocks. But how we can really do that in terms of financing? How do we apply a DRF, a disaster risk financing lens, our approach to the social protection? We've seen Indonesia's very comprehensive social protection framework, the different programmings, but from a practical standpoint, as our first presentation was mentioning, when you calculate the risk, the residual risk, basically you go down to the programs, you have to calculate the cost of that scale up, or how many programs you are scaling up to whom, right? So based on that scale up, that's how you can actually choose or devise your disaster risk financing strategy and instruments. Luckily, Indonesia has already the strategy in place, has several instruments to choose from. So this is the starting point of how a financing strategy is attached or linked to an adaptive social protection program or more than one program, a system itself, right? So next slide, please. Today's goal is simple. We need to do more with less. There is less money and more needs, more crises, but still public finance will remain essential to achieving our developmental goals. This is a key message, but policymakers more and more in these days acknowledge that meeting those goals will require new, innovative, and sustainable sources of finance, right? This is when disaster risk finance comes into play and all those instruments. But it's clear to have an understanding that we are still in the public finance domain and area of expertise, right? So there's still a lot to be done in order to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of those systems, right? So what can Indonesia do to leverage those funds, those DRF funds and strategy and insurance in place now for the poorest, most vulnerable children, right? So what disaster risk financing offers, it's a better opportunity to leverage additional resources for child-centered social protection and adaptive social protection, of course. And they can make those resources more efficient and importantly, more results-oriented, because you are setting up already the results when it's triggered and for what. So it's really a way to really be more effective. But still, there are two critical elements when we are looking at maximizing the effectiveness of these financing mechanisms and strategies for social protection in shock response or adaptive social protection. There are two main elements. One is to understand and to have an analytical framework to essentially link the public finance management, the disaster risk management, and the social policies, social protection thematic areas, which Indonesia has in place. Good news. And secondly, to to understand the benefits and the operational considerations when matching those instruments to the social protection schemes and programs that are on the ground. And we have seen with Mrs. Daya how this is being done, right? So, as you can see on the framework on the right, the policy and institutional environment that is surrounding all these different elements is what determines how these plans, ad hoc measures are applied when disasters strike, right? Our research in Southeast Asia points three main important findings. That the main source of funding, also during COVID, as we have heard, for disaster response is domestic finance. Then there is a limited market-based risk transfer mechanism still in this region, but also globally. But some regional efforts, risk pooling platforms are being developed, right? So, of course, this strategy for Indonesia means that there are more market-based risk transfer mechanisms in place. Then the current ex-ante DRF arrangements appear to provide still inadequate fiscal capacity to deal with the cost of these shocks, of the shocks we are facing, right? And especially at the local level, at subnational level, as you were mentioning, how is, where the shocks happen and the less fiscal capacity is in place, that how those instruments, fill those gaps are actually still a challenge for this region and also globally. So that basically means that the reserves are not sufficient to cover the cost of disasters in the range of climate change. Next slide, please. In terms of operationally speaking, when considering linking, and we have heard already from you, what does it mean in reality in Indonesia, to linking the RF instruments with social protection, anti-social protection, there are 5 elements that we need to consider, starting for the first one, the type of crisis, the risk and vulnerability assessments. As we've heard that there are data information in emergencies already in place, like DVI, CDIC, right? So Indonesia has considerably improved its capacity for integrating early warning systems and risk and vulnerability analysis into emergency decision making, right? This is important. And there are ongoing efforts, as we've seen. This is good news, but still, those information, mechanisms need to be linked to the programs in place. The second and third, in terms of the adequacy and the timeliness of those payments provided by the RF instruments, in the design of those instruments and strategies is basically where it lays their capacity to adequately address the essential needs of the poorest. And I think Indonesia is being, investing, putting an effort on developing those to be more timely. Of course, when they are pre-arranged, that makes even more timelier, right? But still, we shouldn't forget about the PFM system, as I will show you next, which is really what allows those funds to reach the poorest and most vulnerable. Of course, in terms of the setup and availability of DRF fundings and instruments, we've seen that you have a solid basis already in Indonesia with the strategy and so on. So this is totally possible. It's just a question of linking them up better with the different programs and coordination and PFM mechanisms. Next slide, please. So, as we've seen during COVID, there was, before fiscal space, we need political space. And COVID showed that when political space is there, the expansion of cash transfers and social protection follows suit. So we've seen that it's possible. But still today we are noting a few trends of the investing in social protection. Of course, facing consolidation. Some countries are facing globally the food and fuel crisis. So a few challenges that is really making that the investment become more prominent in many countries. So we need to look for that and keep investing. And in terms of PFM, how those flow of funds can be improved, how we can make sure that those pre-arranged financing instruments or risk retention financing instruments can reach better and faster the intended beneficiaries. Our research found that the use of those pre-arranged PFM processes to manage disaster expenditure is essential. not only pre-arranged financing, but pre-arranged processes for channeling those funds. Even when sophisticated DRF instruments, even those instruments will face challenges in terms of PFM if they're not in place. So countries should ideally have a PFM regulation that enable the flow of those funds rapidly in anticipation or in response to a disaster, of course. And even in countries where much has been achieved in developing those instruments, like in Indonesia, the actual channel through which funds allow, to flow from the treasury to the lane agencies responsible for social protection in this case, is still unclear and problematic, and that may lead to significant delays, right? At the very least, clear rules are required to on at least on how those additional money or expenditure or monies can be channeled to spending agencies in the middle of the fiscal year to address unexpected shocks, for instance, through budget reallocations, supplementary funding, or insurance payouts in this case. So strong government coordination across levels and agencies that is aligned with financing flows needs to include PFM and delivery arrangements in order to be effective. And even in cases where the fund disbursement mechanisms exist, like in this case in Indonesia, challenges still arise from multiple agencies and levels implementing uncoordinated responses and so on. So that's why the framework you are developing in Indonesia for adaptive social protection is so important, right? Just my final message that a strong PFM system, including a careful balance between the ability to utilize those budgets flexibly, but also to track and report the disaster expenditure, can avoid underutilization of funds while also increasing the transparency and acceptability of social protection spending during shocks. And just to finalize, next slide, please. The agendas that are critical for Indonesia, also Southeast Asian countries and member states, is really starts by of course, strengthening the core social protection mechanisms in place, but then follow through with the PFM, risk-informed PFM processes, having also financing in mind always when you develop the system and the programs, and then move into the more trigger-based risk analytics area of work, which is also important for those pre-arranged mechanisms to be able to be triggered. So back to you, all from my side. Happy to take questions later.
Okay, thank you, Ruben. Give applause to Ruben for presenting the experience from other region to implement ASP. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, sebagaimana kita telah
So, ladies and gentlemen, after receiving Ruben's presentation, there are some things that need to be taken into consideration, and this get more interesting. And Ruben also explains about instruments as explained by Ria, but more interesting thing is that a different type of disaster can determine the different benefits that can be get from the insurance and also the time. And to formulate all of the complexity, I would like to invite Mr. Saud Sagala to overview behind the integration of DRFI and ASP. Mr. Saud Sagala, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you. Also, the speaker for joining us, and also the opening remarks delivered by Bapanas and BNPB. When we talk about integration, we talk about how the stakeholders play their roles, and we will discuss this further in our presentation. I am asked to share how to enable the integration, and I'm lucky that Mrs. Yogi has presented the disaster pooling fund, the strategy, and also in terms of social security, it is very rich. So we hope that we can go into a point when an integration happens. Actually, it is an ongoing process, but we still have more to accelerate. So this is our team, and within this context I would like to share you the rationale for ASP and DRFI integration, why we need to integrate them. And in a more simple term, it's about how to build a resilient community. And the goal is a resilient community, but the financing factor becomes the significant or a key issue that needs to be considered. So the big concept has been explained, particularly on DRFI and ASP. Usually I present a slide on disaster, and then the second slide will be on the financing gaps, but since it has been presented, I don't use that anymore. But saying that Indonesia has a gap in the disaster finance is debatable, and there have been major disasters such as earthquake in Lombok and North Sulawesi, earthquake and liquefaction, and also tsunami and earthquake in Sunda Straits. Not to mention also other hydrometeorology disasters. Other than loss of lives, we have gaps of finance as well. So the timing is very good. Launched in 2018. It's been 5 years, and it's mentioned that there is an ICE insurance on a state-owned asset, a contingency fund, and other finding. And actually it also includes the household, and ASP is inside. So actually it's there even though it's not yet explicitly mentioned. And then in 2019 we initiated to discuss the discourse on ASP, and it has come up globally ever since. Even though when we talk about the evidences, we can trace them back before 2019. And Mr. Dinar and Mrs. Dia also said that during a disaster event, people who are categorized as not poor will return to the poor level. So efforts are taken, and one of the alternatives is the ASP. Even though when we talk about ASP, we can elaborate further than that. But that's the big concept. So that in terms of finance, it is enough, and at the same time, it supports the resilience community. So this is about developing the ASP financing strategy. Mr. Dinar has mentioned a lot on the data, registration of social economy, and the developmental concept. And I think Mr. Dinar has traveled Indonesia quite frequently to promote ASP, and praise to God, we have gained so many buy-in, but it's not yet finished. That's why we include this into the long-term and medium-term national and regional plans. So the point is, we also we have the ASP here, we have the RFI here. So how to develop it? For sure, we have to talk about that what to finance, how much financing is needed, sources, and etc. So I get a question about how much do you need. Well, I can tell you, if I have the answer, then everything's finished. But the dynamic is very high, so we have to talk to other stakeholders. But this is the main concept. We want to see how the social protection covers not only the regular, but also covers the disaster management and also climate change adaptation. These are a few examples of various choices of ASB, like cash transfers. Have we done this before? Yes, we have. Even though this is called as new, but this is not totally new. So that in the future, the goal of building the resilience of the community can happen. We have the goal, we have the source of fund, we have the mechanism of delivery, and etc. And we can discuss this in more details in terms of the DRR during the disaster event and during the rehabilitation and recovery. So these are the examples. And I believe that our colleagues in the ministry will say that yes, we have implemented those mechanisms or assistances like family hope program, cash social assistance, etc. Meaning that there is a social insurance there and other specific insurances. And indeed, maybe some are still in the piloting level, such as the subsidies for agriculture or livestock insurance or fisherman insurance, etc. So these are also examples of national programs, and this is part of building resiliency, and the financing can be in an integrated mechanism that to lead to the goal to finance the community. So this is the data on how much financing is needed for the programs. We have estimation, we have early estimation. It's still open for adjustments and developments, and we still need 633 trillion rupiah. And if we put the CCA here, then there will be a bigger cost needed, and we need to take this into consideration when we talk about examples. Mr. Dinar said about the developments. It can be done either vertically or horizontally, the coverage and also the beneficiaries. It means that there is a mechanism scheme where government presence to support the needs of the community and the people. I still use this slide because I see this slide is very very important. Actually, Indonesia already has the comprehensive one. Is it enough? I see that this is comprehensive enough, but we still need more details. We still need loops. So when, for example, like ABMN or DRFI, it was born during before the flood of Jakarta, and it can be used. And we need to also think, do we need to put social protection here? So these are the existing examples of financing from other state and local budget. We have the social insurance contribution, insurance and etc. But we need to know that Indonesia has bigger potential We have a crowdfunding, crowd sourcing, and it can be used to help us to increase the capacity. And then the question is, how far have we gone there? We the disaster pooling fund is expected to integrate them in terms of data to ensure that the needs are available and also the fund sources. And talking about sources, it can be from the regulars or the additional or new programs or specific situations in responsive natures, which are made to overcome specific needs during big disaster events or long disaster events such as COVID. And we have many sources. We have discussed about the regular ones. We have pooling fund. We also have other fund sources that can be elaborated. We also have stages here, because all of this scheme has its own storyline. So we have stages, meaning that we will have a short term, medium term, and long term. We will encourage this. We hope that it can be also integrated in the state and regional planning activity. So thank you from me, and looking forward to have a discussion. Round of applause for Mr. Saud Sagala. Very interesting topic. Therefore, we will open a panelist session to respond to what we have discussed and see from the presentations. Before we start the panel discussions, I would like to give you a gentle reminders, both for online and offline participants. If you have specific questions for our speakers, please deliver the questions through http://q&a-session-drfiasp. Without further ado, I would like to invite our panelists today. We are lucky to have both of them here. The first one is, I would like to invite Mr. Engineer Udre, Director of Disaster Risk Mapping and Evaluation of National Agency for Disaster Management. Please step forward. For our second panelist, we have Dr. Safiqul Islam.
To introduce and greet Pak Saiful Islam. Pak Saifikul, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, please stand by, Pak Saifikul. I can give the chance. Saya akan memberikan kesempatan pertama untuk Bapak Udre memberikan tanggapannya atas pembicaraan dari apa yang sudah dipaparkan oleh pembicara-pembicara kita kali ini, hari ini. Silakan Pak Udre untuk.
Ya, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Tadi itu saya mencoba untuk mendengarkan dan sekaligus membuat catatan ya, karena biar lebih pas responnya. Semoga udah bisa dipaparkan. Udah nyampe belum ya? Ya, baik. Jadi saya mengucapkan terima kasih sekali atas kesempatan yang diberikan kepada saya. Dalam beberapa hal mungkin buat saya mencoba melengkapi dalam perspektif bencananya sendiri ya. Ini tadi paparan luar biasa menarik tadi malam. Sebenarnya saya sudah membuatkan sekian banyak komentar per slide, cuman jelas nggak cukup waktunya. Jadi saya mencoba untuk meringkasnya kembali. Satu poin pertama yang mungkin menjadi sangat penting buat saya.
And briefly, due to limited time. So since we talk about risks, and in the risk assessment of disaster event, we studied from our colleagues in a financial sector. Please note that in terms of the risk that we identified, probably they are not very similar to each other. So this picture becomes very important for us to understand, because during formulation, even though we use a different formulation, we portray risk as hazards times vulnerability and divided by capacities. So indeed, this capacity has to be increased. From these three items, we can see the role of our financial strategy. And we also have discussed before the seminar started, I discussed with Mrs. Yogi. Even from a disaster sector, we try to shift issues that are not too interesting for people, such as my experience in Agung volcano. Actually, the eruption stopped, but still tourists did not want to come, and the financial loss was quite massive. And it means that we, at the end of the day, we talk about investment. And since we talk about investment, we expect for profit, meaning that if we don't do this, then the loss will be higher. So in the disaster framework, one of the important point is that we have to be able to make this as our investment. And for sure, this is an important point. Another point is that actually, we have heard some stories as well on experiences in 2018. This is quite an unpleasant story, and as you know, that Jogja has experienced many or several major disasters, and I can see that we are catching with each other. Why? Because in G20 they presented me with an interesting data, and we are now in the midterm review, and the review showed that we already have a global plan, a detailed one. We have indicators, but the result shows that our midterm review says that, for example, the efforts to lower the death number is not achieved. So the number is not getting better, but it's getting worse. And I can see that there is an acceleration in terms of the number of the disaster or the frequency. and the also the level of impact. And from our experience, we learned that actually local wisdoms or local knowledge is also important. And as an example, in Seroja, in East Nusa Tenggara, it is a very dry area, but due to one rain started in at 9 to 4, and as you see the spread of the rain, and as you can see in my slide, the scale of the impact due to the rain. So if we talk about ASB in a disaster, the problem is not finished yet. So finally, it comes to my mind about a competitive scheme. I'm not a person who like a punishment, but this reward system should be lifted into as an encouragement for this, because we can see that different island in our country has different complexity compared to the other island. For example, in terms of livelihood, the failure on harvest, and our president is encouraging to have financing for agriculture insurance. And I am criticizing the data now. We try to collect data on this harvest failure, and it was a very difficult thing to do. For example, if we compensate 8 million Indonesian rupiah for 1 hectare, but the cost to calculate the data is more than 8 million. So if another example is when we build a review in Cianjur. That's why we have the systemic risk system. It's not about talking about social situation in the local area, but it can result or bring impact to our national situation, because, for example, the area provide the rice or main food for national scale. And in economic world, we talk about multiplayer effect, but it is a double. It brings a snowball effect, and we talked about profit as well as losses. And climate change adaptation for us working in disaster is not yet optimally managed. And now we have to integrate both a sector, and we can see a devastating impact due to climate change. I can see that agriculture's experience a significant decrease. And even, for example, if the government has to compensate for damaged houses due to earthquake, for example, the cost is also too massive for our state budget. And if we while at the same time we are only able to provide, for example, 60 million per house, while the sum is not enough to build a new house with disaster uh, requirements. And I try to respond to each presenter, but I do not respond to Mr. South actually, because he represents my idea as well, so we speak in the same language. And this 20 to 30 trillion, we calculate the loss. It is based on the loss of the disaster. For example, we have some numbers of damaged houses times certain number of rupiah. But when we talk about social perspective, it's not like that. For example, in the long term, let's say COVID, and when I discussed with my colleagues in Korea, they said that during the COVID, they did not do school from home. So we still send our students to school because we didn't want to lose the generation if we didn't send them to schools. So it means that there is a main point, which is we need to calculate the risk properly, including the losing of opportunity. It's not only about physical aspect. And if we talk about 30 trillion, actually the fact is we lost more. And Pak Saud also said that we invest $1 to get a profit of $7, and it is very possible. And number two, if we talk about implementation of the risk transfer, it is very promising. But however, in the implementation, it is very difficult for Indonesia because it consists of thousands of islands. Point number three is proactive, and we hope that we can implement this spirit based on the recommendation of the presidents to shift from management or response to mitigation or preparedness. And then the next point is that the main principle of the RFI is that to implement this the other 4 points. And Mrs. Yogi also support the expectancy of the presidents. So we have to shift our priority to the prevention or mitigation. And these 4 main principles, if we can implement them, I think it will be very okay for us. And we also hope to be able to support the flexibility of the Environmental Fund Management Agency, because when we were in Cianjur, West Java, it was very difficult for us to get the precise data of the population. If we don't have a valid data on the population, it will be difficult for us to distribute the assistance. Even we conducted DNA test to make sure that we distributed the correct or the proper assistance to the right person. So I'm lucky that I have an economic background, and during the last G20, we were lucky to have our G20 colleagues to set our position or job as a benchmarking. Talking about the number, can you say how much? I cannot say for sure right now. Can I have another minute? Yes, please. So, in responding to Mr. Dinar presentation, the adaptive concept can be related into the systemic risk to be anticipative. And number two, this PPP or pentahelix is very promising. The integrative national financial framework support the spirit of our state, and the source of funding is pretty strong as well. And the strategy of 4 pillars of ASB is very promising as well, but we need to be careful on the implementation because it can be very challenging. And I agree to the way forward and the challenges of Mr. Dinar. And one more thing that I want to add is that we need to collect more detailed and valid data. And the challenge is very big in collecting data as well. And I want to add from Mr. Ruben to the Mr. Ruben's presentation is that during the COVID case there is a slowdown in the generational growth, and what we have now needs to be adjusted. It's not about a disaster management, but we have to also think about the livelihood. Thank you. That's all from me. Since we have a very limited time, let's move on to Mr. Shafiqul Islam to give a
Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak for a few minutes. So I would like to extend my gratitude to all presenters for the excellent presentation. It actually really gives us like regional, global, and country level perspective here. So as I'm from UNICEF, our basically mandate is children, to make sure that in the current context, the extent and level of vulnerability children face are addressed. So, not is echoing.
Safikul, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear, but it's echoing because I'm speaking, but I'm hearing something back again. Okay, so I would basically, based on the presenters, I would really try to summarize and also give my perspective from my real life experience. So basically, I mean, when we say, I mean, in social protection, nowadays we use lot of terminologies synonymously used. So we are talking about child sensitive social protection, gender sensitive social protection, adaptive social protection. So what does all those really mean? We, from our real life, we understood that social protection is something like that has the capacity to function in three situations. One is like chronic poverty, then addressing cyclical shocks, and also addressing shocks and vulnerabilities during humanitarian situation. So now the question is that the social protection system to effectively functions need to be supported by budget or finance. And then here, like in this today's seminar, our focus is like DRF and emergency social protection financing. So now the question is actually, when we say emergency social protection financing, what do we really mean? Ibu Yugi, in her presentation, she actually clarifies what does DRFI and emergency social protection does mean. So basically, by saying emergency social protection financing, we mean the availability of social protection financing mechanism that enables the government to protect households, including children and women, during climate-induced emergencies. So Ibu has mentioned that it is also called like proactive financing mechanism, or somewhere it is called ex-ante financing measures. Basically, this is important because it ensures predictability to provide life-saving support faster during emergency without like affecting development interventions. So now our presenters, like they have really given strong rationale that why emergency social protection financing is important globally, regionally, and in Indonesia context. So Mas Dinar has mentioned actually in his presentation that equity is an issue, inequity. And then Ibu Dia talks about life cycle based vulnerabilities. But from our real life, what we are experiencing, that in the current world, people particularly in low and upper middle income countries have been facing increased contingencies due to shocks caused by climate induced disasters. And then if we see, if we compare the severity of disasters globally and then in the regional, we have seen then East and South Asia are the hardest hit region. And it is estimated that by 2030, about 100 million people in this region will fall in poverty. And Indonesia, Ibu Yugi has mentioned that Indonesia is one of the most at-risk countries globally, like third out of 193 countries. And Indonesia is after like Philippines and India. And then like we have seen that according to BNPB, between 2019 to 2022, about 2.6 million people were affected by disasters. So it's sort of clear indication that why emergency social protection financing or DRFI is relevant in this context. So now, as I said that I'm from UNICEF, and why are we particularly focusing on children? You should acknowledge that nowadays development economists, they are agreeing and acknowledging that children holds the key to development. So development, any types of development countries are thinking of cannot be really achieved without bypassing the development of children. So my colleague Ruben, in his presentation, he mentioned actually that children and women are disproportionately affected because children, they don't have their own voice. They cannot really say what they need. So it is the responsibility of the adult to make sure that we speak on behalf of them. And then similarly, like other component, children in East Asia and Pacific are the hardest hit. And if we look into Indonesia, in Indonesia, we have seen like close to like over 11% children are income poor. And there are like level of multiple deprivation, although we don't have like exact information, but it is like from anecdotal information, it says that one in every three child are deprived of at least like three social services. So this means that we need to really focus on children, and Robin has mentioned that this can be addressed by appropriate social protection intervention. However, globally, like 3/4 of the child population are yet to be covered by social protection. And then if we see the recommendation from Ibu Yugi, Ruben, Masdina, Budia, and if you summarize that, what actually, how we can really ensure adequate emergency financing. So as Ruben has mentioned, that based on global experience, the most convenient and available means of financing emergency is the domestic financing. And then there is an analysis by Global Social Protection Forum where they mention that almost all the countries in the world has some sort of affordability to finance their social protection except 10 countries. So this means that how then we can really mobilize domestic resources. And then in fiscal space analysis, Ruben has also mentioned that how we can really create additional fiscal space for social protection. And it talks about like expanding tax base, reprioritization of our expenditure, controlling illicit financial flows, then increasing internal borrowing, and increased allocative and operational efficiency. And then we have also experienced that there are regional arrangements to support emergency financing. Like we have regional arrangements in Pacific area, then Southeast Asia, and also Caribbean and Africa. But what the experience says that these arrangements are not really strong enough to support countries, because in real life it has been shown then when it is about cyclical shocks, countries, most of the countries, particularly upper middle income country, they can afford managing their own financial resources. But when it is humanitarian situations, then actually global and regional support is in some cases required. So if we see Ibu Igui has mentioned where actually she has presented the global DRFI framework that actually gives the clear sort of strategy and guidelines that what sort of actions ex ante and post ex post actions are taken for disaster risk financing. And when this DRFI instrument is developed and strategy is implemented, then Ruben has also mentioned, which is very, very important, then we need to follow certain principles, that it should have the capacity to act timely, and then it should provide, like ensure the appropriateness of the support, and then if rules and regulations should be preset so that during emergency, government doesn't need to require additional time. And then we should have also delivery mechanism like or enabling conditions so that immediately we can act on. And then decisions should be like evidence-based. And finally, as Dinar has mentioned, the most important that we should focus on also equity, because when we see inequity, the only means is to ensure that we do our financial, allocate our financial resources equitably. And what is important to mention here, that East Asia and Pacific region is far more ahead, and particularly in Indonesia, the government is strongly committed. Government has declared, as Dinar has mentioned, social protection reform, and then where like financing social protection is one of the key components. And the Ministry of Finance is already have DRFI, and currently they are working that how emergency social protection financing can be integrated into DRFI. And we have seen from South presentation, they are supporting the ministry. We hope that by end of this year, there would be like a specific action point. And also, this study would provide the ministry with what would be the pre-arranged rules. So we hope that by end of this year, Indonesia will integrate this emergency social protection financing into DRFI, and other countries of like in this broader region as well as of the world would learn from us.
Pacifico.
So I would like to
Yeah, please conclude.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to conclude what Ruben has said, that political importance is very, very crucial. At the same time, the ministries and the officials concerned, those who are involved in this part, they should have adequate capacity. And finally, we have to keep in mind that if we strengthen the social protection system, then we will require less. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Safiku, for your response to the presenters' topics. Karena kita memiliki waktu yang sangat terbatas, mungkin pembicara juga ingin menanggapi apa yang disampaikan oleh kedua penanggap. Tapi kita akan langsung saja.
Like also to respond, but let's go to the participants first. And I would like to open opportunities for participants who wants to deliver their questions. And please raise your hands, and we will provide you with the microphone for you so that you can deliver your questions, please. Ladies on my right and a gentleman on the left front. Please share us your name and institution and whom you want to deliver your questions to. My name is Desi from the Fiscal Policy Agency. I would like to deliver my questions to Mr. Dinar and Mrs. Dinar about the steps of reformations to the current social protection. We know that we are now focused more to the disaster response. So learning from the previous COVID, how to prepare the preparedness and mitigation, particularly for vulnerable groups such as elderly, women, and persons with disabilities. Thank you. Let's collect the questions first. And next question, the gentleman over there. Thank you for this opportunity. My question is about data presented by Mr. Dinar and Mrs. Dia that social protection is basically about data. As we see that data on social protection in Indonesia tends to have differences between agencies, and it is a major challenge. For example, during the pandemic, the data of PKH beneficiaries are different from other social assistance beneficiaries, and this can lead to community jealousy. And indeed, our current problem is that the data of Ministry of Social Affairs is different from a Ministry of other ministries, for example. And therefore, we need to integrate the data. My question is how the government or ministries to integrate the data to prevent the data overlaps, so that the distribution of social protections will not result to community frictions or tension. What's your name again? My name is Diki Wahyudi. From Disaster Management, Gadjah Mada University. Can I open next question?
How far the social protection improve the social system? Pak Dinar, can you explain or give answer to that? This is from Miss Desi, right? Transformation steps that we have at the Ministry of National Development Planning. We are drafting the presidential decree. There is a milestone that should be achieved when we transform social protection program to be more effective. It has been implemented practically, but it's still fragmented. There are ministry and agency that already develop more adaptive approaches, such as Ministry of Social. They have a flagship program, Pekanas Sembako, to be more responsive to disaster. There are some initiatives that have been conducted by the Ministry of Village Empowerment, how to be responsive to social issue in relation to disaster. There are some pilot programs in relation that is still limited to each jurisdiction, but what we need is more expansive and more collaborative, so that it will not be concentrated or fragmented in each sector, and should be implemented by many agencies at the same time. We hope that with having the presidential decree, it will become our legal umbrella for us to take steps, and it will be connected with the DRFI and pooling fund. What resources are needed so that this program can be more adaptive? It will be facilitated during the budgeting and planning stage. Thank you, Ms. Dia. I would like to add, actually, the social protection system, it's the existing program is already to prepare during the disaster conditions, such as PKH or food resilience program. It's done by the government every year, so it's preparation stage. During the disaster, the government can inject their assistance, because the recipient of the social assistance, they already have bank account, so it's not difficult for us to give the funding to the recipient. But it's true that the challenges that we face is how can we able to reach the community even much quicker, especially those who initially do not require assistance. Now they can receive assistance. So Bapenas have mentioned that there are some integration efforts, data integration efforts. It's quite difficult because we have been doing this for years, but the challenges is not as easy as we expected, because Indonesia is very broad. We hope that we can use the data as best as possible to make sure that our effort is not wasted. And now the priority of the Vice President to reduce extreme poverty, we truly target family or individual who are only extreme 10%. They can receive assistance from regular social protection. So the improvement efforts is already available, and the transformation of social protection is it's a work in progress, as mentioned by Dinar, that we are preparing the draft of the presidential decree. So we are still coordinating. There's a controlling team or steering team that control everything to make sure the distribution. So the transformation process is still ongoing, and we realize that there are many homework that needs to be done, but I see it positively compared to 10 years ago. So I'm starting to give support for social assistance, especially social assistance. Thank you, Ms. Dia. Let's continue to the second question. Dinar, can you explain the integration strategy? I believe that Bapenas have pushed some efforts. Can you explain on that? Thank you very much. This is an initial step for us to have a social economy registration. We hope that it will not remove or disregard the data owned by each agency. We hope that each agency have their own data specific to their needs, but we hope that there is one data, one system also that have a high interoperability, so that the basic data will be agreed by all ministries. Ministry of Social may have specific data in relation to vulnerability, such as disability or elderly, or that data in Ministry of Education have specific data on education level and so on. But there is one data that we agree together and we refer together in relation to improve the welfare, in relation to risk of disaster. So if we talk about poor people, we talk with one language between one agency and ministry, and what intervention they will be able to identify what intervention that they need and what intervention that they already receive. That's what we expect for social economy registration process. I hope that it will not take very long time, and we hope that we can integrate everything, but it will not remove the specific data, but we have one single source of truth that will connect with the identification number and so on. Thank you, Dinar, for the explanation. I hope that you who ask question will have a clear answer too. Without further, I will now give a microphone to Yogi to respond to question from the Asian Secretariat. Please.
more knowledge transfer and capacity building between countries. I think that's.
Thank you, Bu Yogi, for your response. I hope it answered your question. And we have 12 minutes left. Kita punya 12 menit waktu sisa. Jadi mungkin kita akan langsung menuju kepada pertanyaan yang sudah tertera pada
questions submitted through online platform. First question for Ibu Yogi. It's anonymous. it was mentioned that in the future, in pooling fund, there will be ASP component. Does it mean that pooling fund is regular social protection budget of each agency or ministry pulled into one, and then when disaster strike, it is used to provide the ASP for those impacted? If so, does it mean that it will not disrupt the regular social protection program of each ministry or agency? Allow me to answer first. Actually, disaster pooling fund is a complementary for funding. It is complementary to what is currently mechanism that we have through regular expenditure, and then disaster response fund in BNPB and so on. In time, the polling fund will be obtained through the forever fund for funding for disaster. Partially will be used for the polling fund. It will then be developed and it will be used when needed. In terms of utilization, ASP also in the TFB context will not replace everything, remove the existing social protection, but it will be complementary in responding disaster to disaster. That may be what I can give you, the answer that I can give you. Mr. Dinner, anything you would like to add?
As for the regular social protection, we have a certain pose for that, but then it's more on how to be expensive in a disaster event. That's what we expect to be facilitated by this pooling fund. Thank you, Mr. Dinar. I hope it answers to the question. I move forward to the next question, directed to Mr. Saud from Sinta Surada.
Effectiveness with zero risk or mistake, is it possible? So I will give it the chance to Pak Saud or Pak Udre to answer the question. It's very technical.
Yeah, in English bahasa.
I believe she's not, she doesn't speak Indonesian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. Right. I mean, this can be quite technical. First of all, what I would like to mention that there are already schemes on social protections. So I was saying about the expansion from the horizontal, vertical earlier. So that would include also those in the, the beneficiary, which is children can be part of it. And the family also can be part of it, right? So it is important to really have a good data. I think in the previous discussion was saying about it, and to make sure who will be in the category of the beneficiary or those in the poverty or in the category of vulnerability. And I believe, looking at this, I think it's important to have that, particularly poverty, disasters, and climate risk all together, so that the children within this danger area will be considered, will be also taken as the list of the data. And then in terms of what kind of social protection will be used, I may not explain earlier about the risk layering, but it was mentioned by Ibu Yogi earlier. There was a concept that makes sure to link between the type of the natural hazard or the disaster that might happen, the frequency, the intensity, and also what kind of intervention or social protection that they can receive. So there are different layers that show what kind of social protection that will apply considering the conditions of the beneficiary as well as the capacity of the government. I think that's how I can respond at the moment. Of course, this can be good for the further implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Saud. I think Ruben can also answer these questions, and I give it the chance to Ruben to answer this question. Ruben, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Happy to do so.
Yeah, please.
Yes, thanks so much. Yeah, just to complement, there are few easy ways to make sure that you decrease the risk of exclusion of children, basically from anti-social protection. First, make simple the design of those programs. Make sure that child benefits are easy to design in a sense that they are straightforward when you define the age bracket that you want to reach out. So make it simple, reduce exclusion by the design. Then focus secondly in those are the direct child sensitive, right? Then you have the indirectly child sensitive programs that you have seen so many under the Indonesian framework. You have so many programs that could be indirectly child sensitive. So then you can move on to those other programs and make sure that, as you were saying, trying to make sure that the data you have, the targeting system you have include as much as possible children and women and their families there. And finally, we know that, as my colleague Safikur was saying, the highest return of investment in social protection is in the early years, from 0 to 2 years old. So focus on the window of opportunity of those first 1,000 days. When you design programs aiming at that age, you are for sure investing in the future of your children at the highest return of investment as possible, right? So you have different ways. So again, start by the direct child sensitive, child benefits, move on to the other programs that you can actually complement those families and households during disasters, and with that you will end up with a lower exclusion rate of children in those contexts. Over to you.
Thank you, Pak Ruben, for your detailed explanation. Pak Udre mau menambahkan dari apa yang pertanyaan tadi? Kita ada skip dokter dari.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think from two presenter has already give a good explanation about this point. Maybe I just would like to put additional information that maybe one of the most important things for the pooling fund is the sources, because according to my experience in BNPB, it is not so easy for us, because actually the sources of funding in Indonesia is very, very big. If you see, when we have a disaster, a lot of people would like to give a charity, and it is we need to manage it. And after that, how we can share this big of funding to the appropriate person. So I think the pooling fund with the information, detailed information about the social protection will become a very, very good challenge and also opportunity to make something like you mentioned in the last sentence is about the zero risk. And for the zero risk, something that very important is how we can understand about the risk itself. So if we can get the number, get the understanding better with the very good data, so yeah, it is our all of our dreams that everything can be zero risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Udre, for answering the questions from the online audience. Kita punya waktu sekitar 2,5 menit.
We don't have 2.5 minutes. I think still enough for a final question. One only. A gentleman in the middle, please. Thank you very much. I am Willy from Satu Nama, Yogyakarta. I have a question for 4 presenters, I think the outcome is about poverty reduction. And for sure, these two approaches should be able to be delivered down to local government. Mrs. Yogi, I think, presented that the financing is still more to a state budget and regional budget. And if in our long-term planning it will be shifted to donors, the question is that which donor, whether is it international, local, or crowdfunding. The second question is about the political aspect. Since these two approaches, when we want to implement them at a local government, for example, the planning model should also see the stock of knowledge at the local government and regional House of Representatives. Are the political actors acknowledge that these approaches can help us in our future plannings? If they do not comprehend the importance of these approaches, I think it will be useless. So I see a correlation between political actors at local and national level and these two approaches. And a gentleman of BNPB said that a disaster is also related to livelihood. If we see the poverty reduction, we should also see to what extent is our livelihood. Therefore, a sustainable livelihood should also be an indicator to see the progress of the two approaches. I would say that the regional and national development planning must ensure that these approaches are good enough to implement in the process. How? Thank you. Please provide quick answer for 3 minutes. Who wants to go first? Just a quick response. I think just a small clarification. So it doesn't mean that in the future with the DRFE we will draw a bigger fund from the state budget. Instead, how we will try to implement how to optimize the use of the budget. So through the DRFI, we can develop the balance of the fund there, and it's more than collecting and spending. So we will have some which will be simulated and also developed. As for the political will, please. So I would agree that this will be the main job of the sectoral agencies. And the first political will is shown by the regulation at the highest level. That's why we enacted the presidential regulation, and after we have achieved them, and then we will think about the implementations. Just a brief addition. I saw the question as a good input as a political aspect for future planning. It is in line with my idea on the importance of education, not only to community, but also to the regional House of Representatives and other inline agencies. So we should think about this, the capacity building. And the second point is about livelihood. It's true that the government by implementing the social security, how the beneficiaries of social security can be graduated into beneficiaries. But please have a note that we have to ensure that they have access to sustainable livelihood. And but our current homework is that access to livelihood and access to training is still sporadic. So we should back to integrating, collaborating, and integrating. It is a big homework for us, but we agree that livelihood becomes our keyword for this. We don't want to provide assistance, but we want to ensure that a community is resilient to any kind of disasters, including economic disaster. Mr. Saud, quick response, please. Thank you. We have discussed climate change, poverty with its dynamic. I would say the politics is also a dynamic, and it is something that we should consider because they affect to each other. And we can also see that at a national or regional level. I would like to highlight to the regional level. We have human resources and also understanding on, let's say, pooling fund and the ASP. At a community level is the implementation level of this mechanism, and the key actor is the regional level. And how to interpret this implementation into the subnational level, this is the homework of Indonesian government. The government have piloted in developing the system of delivery in 3 subnationals area, but still the journey is still long. Another brief addition in terms of regional development. As we said before, the regional development government agencies will submit proposals as well, but we also hope that there will be participation and contribution from regional government, and we are designing how to make the mechanism more efficient. Currently, each regional government has their own spending, and in the future we plan to conduct risk transfer through insurance mechanism. And for example, the regional government can participate in paying the insurance premium. And for example, the higher the risk, the more the payment. And this is just an example, and we are still designing on this. And I think we already have enough to respond to the questions. We are at the end of our discussion now, and we have again so many aspirations. Actually, we have all of the ingredients, we have all the spices, and our homework is how to cook all the ingredients. And please give big round of applause to all of the speakers. Thank you, Mr. Ruben, for joining us online. And I would like to hand over to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you, all of the speakers and our moderators. Do you want us to take your pictures? I'd like to invite the speakers and moderators to back on stage or to return to their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us in this ballroom and also joining us online through YouTube channel of the Ministry of Finance. One thing that we can conclude is that Indonesia is the leading country of the implementation of the RFI. However, in the future, multiple stakeholders collaboration is frequently mentioned. And because we have various stakeholders joining here, we can get an illustration on how to determine our future steps. For sure, challenges are there to identify the needs on how to implement the ASP and also how to identify the proper mechanism. And for sure, it is an ongoing process. But today's discussion is a good step forward to support Indonesia's resiliency, and this is one of examples that is offered by Indonesia. And we are at the end of our discussion. And once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to all speakers, moderators, panelists, and ladies and gentlemen, all of the discussion participants. And we hope that this discussion can be a consideration in encouraging the reformation of the social protection and also in the implementation of the Minister of Finance regulation in developing the DRFI. Let's give a round of applause for all of us for discussing together on these important topics. To wrap up today's seminar on disaster risk financing and insurance and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia, I would like to invite Dr. Maliki of Ministry of National Development Planning. Please step forward to deliver your closing remark.
Well, sepertinya memang setelah berdiskusi.
It seems after discussion, the keyword is coordination and integration. Ladies and gentlemen, spokespersons, I think you represent the host, the head of the regional bilateral cooperation, Bapak Utrecht, Miss Dia Larsati from TNP 2K, Mr. Dinar from the Ministry of National Development Planning, from UNICEF attending online, Mr. Safikul and Mr. Ruben. Mr. Saud, who always assists us from the RTI Indonesia, and representative of ministries, agencies, both online and in person who present in person. Assalamualaikum, may peace be upon us. I forgot to say hi to the moderator also. First of all, I would like to extend our gratitude for the invitation for the closing remark to close this seminar on disaster risk financing and insurance and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia, as an event that support Asian Chairmanship in Indonesia 2023. As you all aware, and you heard in this session, that the government have pushed various social protection which is adaptive and as a strategy to eradicate the poverty in Indonesia. The response to pandemic, COVID pandemic, and other natural disasters, it is a political space for adaptive social protection. I saw and heard one or two requirements that we need to have in developing social protection which is adaptive is political will. And the next, what we discuss now, is on the fiscal space, so political space and then fiscal space. In the political space, of course, there are final note how we can build literacy and strengthen coordination and participation from the local government in developing, especially the next requirement, fiscal space, as a learning point to develop better protection long midterm 2020-2024 have developed systematic comprehensive steps. We have heard from Ms. Dia. She has shown how actually the transformation from our social protection, which was relatively fragmented, and there are still many gaps within the last 10 years, we have now developed and fill in many gaps. So our social protection fulfill the life cycle concept from the beginning, from the first 1000 days of life until social protection for elders. Although the latter is still required to be built stronger to support our objective to become developed country. Our vision is to how can we chase that in 2045. President Jokowi said that there are many things that we have developed, but how can we continue this from 2025 to 2045? Our vision is, as a developed country, how can we strengthen social protection, adaptive social protection, and it's already included in our long-term plan 2025 to 2045, and we are trying to formulate that in our midterm plan 2025 to 2029. So the most urgent is for the first short midterm plan in coordination and integration, because all of the social protection already available. The data is quite rich. Indonesia is very rich with data, Ms. Yuki. If you check budget of data management, it is more than 12 trillion, and we have a data 1, data 2, and data 3 is relatively, but it is still relatively not yet consistent. And the initial, in the first midterm development plan from 2023, 2024, 2025, for the first midterm development plan can become our foundation for our acceleration. It is actually mandated by the president in the cabinet assembly before COVID. Even we need to reform our social protection. Those who are already good can be improved to become more integrated. There is a better identification for those who are vulnerable and poor. So when we are experiencing disasters such as COVID, we can accelerate the distribution of support. If there is if there are people who are newly become poor, then they can immediately do the fund transfer. So with adaptive social protection, it should be much faster and better. Bapanas, together with the ministries and other agencies, try to develop the presidential regulation on how to develop ASP pillars, adaptive social protection. Ladies and gentlemen, to mitigate the impact of disaster, including COVID-19, social expansion have been conducted. We have seen the identification. However, the challenges in the expansion is still a lot. So building much better and faster is not yet able to be implemented. Building much better, but how can we make that faster? Especially for unresponsive programs, some are still fragmented and not yet supported by comprehensive and sustainable funding scheme. So we need to develop that further. This learning point shows that social protection must be able to optimum during normal and can be more adaptive and fully functional during emergency. Through life cycle intervention to the individual, family, community, and nationally, PSA is expected to fulfill the to manage with a disaster and able to strengthen the connection between those elements. So this comprehensive approach have objective to support the government and community by strengthening the adaptation of community towards shocks. Before the shock happens, the anticipative capacity, and to reduce the negative effect after the shocks. Absorptive capacity. So in long term, PSA is expected to contribute to the community's welfare by building better prior to the disaster, during disaster, and post disaster. It can become pillar for more sustained microeconomy and more continuous economy. Ladies and gentlemen, PSA requires 4 pillars. First is the management of partnership and agency for implementation between government and between related parties. So that's how we can integrate and coordinate better. Secondly, it was mentioned data and information. More comprehensive, more accurate, more up-to-date, how we can integrate that with data of disaster risks at Pak place. It can be integrated, so the intervention will be based on that vulnerability. The improvement of program mentioned by Ms. Dia, how can we expand to expand the program and intervention so that we can support the community prior, post, and during the disaster. And today we are discussing about financing. How can we provide sustainable and timely financing? It requires perfection in make sure that the scheme that we have will be much more sustainable. It is related to the social support and accountability of the PSA. It has been done namely through having pooling fund through adaptive social protection. So in the future, other sources of fund expected to be expanded, anticipating for disaster. We hope that the local government can contribute further, and also to provide insurance for the state and regional assets. Through analysis of cost and benefit, this formula can the local government and private companies can identify risks that may happen in their area. Through Indonesian vision, our objective is how can we improve the class of community economy from poor to vulnerable to middle economic level, and we hope that we can reach 80% of mid level income community. We hope we can eradicate poverty from the social level and environmental level, so that we are more prepared to the emergency situation. Adaptive social protection make sure that the shock experienced by the community will not cause new poverty, and we hope that the community can build quicker and better. So synergy is the key. So through this today's seminar, we hope that this will become a forum for participants to exchange their ideas, to develop policies and development activities, and provide suggestions to for the next development period. The main impact is to provide new solutions of funding and manage risks in disaster. We also hope that this event will become catalyst for coordination between agencies so that we can realize the adaptive social protection. That concludes my remark. Thank you very much, and may peace be upon us. Good afternoon, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Round of applause to Dr. Maliki. Thank you very much for the remarks. That concludes our seminar. Thank you very much to all agencies and Ministry of Finance, United Nations Children's Fund, Resilience Development Initiative, and all other agencies and parties who support the seminar on disaster risk insurance and adaptive social protection implementation in Indonesia. I would like to remind today's presentation will be able to be accessed through the using the QR code on the flyer that we have provided you in the beginning of this event. After this event, I would like to invite you and the participants, moderator, panelists to have lunch in Yogyakarta Kitchen in the main lobby. They will be committee members that will direct you. It's on the first floor of Marriott. And lastly, for the development of this event, we have provided you with a feedback form. Please fill in the feedback form before you leave this room, so that our activity in the future will be much better. As a final word on behalf of the committee, we would like to apologize for any shortcomings that we may have during this event. Thank you very much, and see you next time in the Asian Championship. Good afternoon, and thank you very much.